Welcome to Baby in the House, the podcast where we tackle all those tough parenting questions where everyone's got an opinion. From grandparents to neighbors to that nosy lady behind you at the line in the grocery store.
Where we examine the research, share our experiences, and those of the families we care for. We give you the clarity and confidence you need to make the right choices for your baby and family.
Without guilt, confusion, or analysis paralysis. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Baby in the House. I am super excited because this time we're talking about some things that I had never really considered and get asked about quite frequently. So, two things. One is bilingual kids and what the research says about children that come up in houses that have multiple language spoken. Is it best for them? Is there an advantage? Does it cause speech delay or those sorts of things? And then the second topic is screen time. So Tina, if we can start with the issue of bilingual children, bilingual parents, what are we talking about? What does the research show? How should we think about that?
Some parents are worried that if their kids have exposure to more than one language, that it will confuse them, that it'll cause speech or other cognitive delays. But the research does not bear that concern out. The research shows that babies can listen to, understand, and eventually speak more than one language without becoming confused, without experiencing delays. And they follow the same milestones you would expect of kids who are exposed to just one language. And in fact, there's a protective benefit and some huge benefits for parents, for babies whose parents can give them two or more languages. So the research shows that they have improved cognitive and problem-solving abilities. Those are really good things, especially once they become teenagers, because teenagers, their cognitive and problem-solving abilities are sometimes like toddlers again.
So if you can get them extra boosts of those things early in life, then maybe they'll have more when they enter those adolescent years.
Maybe. Well, I don't know. I didn't read that research, but that could be great. They also have stronger executive functioning. And executive functioning, as you know, Phil, is really fundamental to doing well in school, in navigating your life, even in some mental health kinds of things, really being able to, executive function is sort of the system that is like the CEO of what happens in your world. And executive functioning is an area that we see some challenges for kids who have attentional, issues and challenges. So, and in fact, there's some research, a lot of research actually, that shows that executive function ability is a better predictor of grades than intelligence is. So
right.
Executive functioning is huge. Those people who, and I think you're one of them, because I was just, before we recording, I was just saying how good you are at so many things, juggling all of it at once. Those people who seem to function like they're just really high functioners. They rarely drop the ball. They can manage that's executive function. So that's a huge benefit from bilingual exposure. They also have what is called meta-linguistic skills, which is really a fancy word, but it really means thinking about language, thinking about words and the meaning of words. And so obviously if you write or even just talking and communicating, they have the ability to think about language in a more complex way. And a couple other benefits, better attentional regulation, which is great. And then this is really interesting. And I would love to hear your sort of theories about this as a doctor. Bilingualism in some studies is showing that it's protective against some cognitive decline kinds of things like Alzheimer's disease. So having I don't know if the brain is stimulated more, and we know that having ongoing novel stimulation is protective. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? What would you?
I think that's really interesting, and I can see how when I think about the cognitive decline and later in life dementia, Alzheimer's, things along those lines. I think what I've seen is people that are able to maintain that mental sharpness and be continually challenged often have less of that mental decline. I'm thinking of these, I've read a book about some nuns in Minnesota who are like super sharp in the mind, and they have really low rates of dementia. And I I'm showing the limits of my knowledge about them and ignorance on the specifics, but that stands out to me as something worth Googling. That they have lower rates of that because they really work all day long on honing their intelligence and challenging themselves. So I can see that certainly being the case in somebody that's bilingual or exposed to different languages or has to flip-flop between English and Spanish or English and Russian or whatever they're being exposed to on a regular basis, that keeps their brain challenged in ways that you wouldn't have if you had everybody speaking the same language and really didn't have to move outside your comfort zone to remember, okay, how do I say that to this person in my household versus another person in my household? I hear frequently from parents what you described and explained so well is that we speak two languages at home. Is that going to make them have a speech delay? Are they going to be behind in kindergarten? And I try and reassure parents with the same knowledge and information that you shared that no, actually, it's probably a good thing that they're hearing multiple languages at home. It might in the short term impact, specific words that they acquire. If you say a certain word or phrase more frequently in Spanish or Vietnamese rather than in English, but overall, it's actually better for kids.
Yeah, they have those cognitive benefits, not to mention all the enhanced social and cultural awareness kinds of things as well. I'll tell you just clinically, as I've worked with a lot of kids over the years in school settings and in private practice settings for mental health stuff, that there are times that I've come across bilingual kids who are really struggling academically. And so, I might recommend a neuropsychological evaluation to really make sure there aren't underlying learning challenges. And recently, there was a kid who was really struggling with language-based work. So I recommended that he be assessed, but he was bilingual. And so the parents were like, well, that's because he speaks two languages. That's why he's having trouble reading and writing. And I was like,
right.
I'm not so sure. Why don't we have him assessed in his other language? So we actually had the neuropsych test done in both of his primary languages. And it was really interesting because both evaluations showed some learning disabilities that went across both languages. So it really wasn't about the language. It was really about how his brain processed information and language. I actually think this kid, based on what I know now about the research on bilingual language, think that he might have even struggled more had he not had the benefit of bilingual exposure. That's just a guess, but what we see is across both languages, if kids have learning disabilities, it shows up in both languages, like dyslexia or something like that. It's not that they would have trouble with one language but not the other. They would have trouble across both languages. Again, that's how it's about how the brain's processing information. So,
well, and it's interesting because I think that it would be easy just to chalk it up to that as he's struggling in school because he's hearing different languages and he can't keep them straight or something like that, which isn't the case and is probably a problem with society that's what we would jump to as the culprit for a difficulty learning rather than looking at it more in depth and saying, okay, when we do these testing in English, we have these delays or issues. When we do it in the other language that they speak, same issues. Oh, maybe it's not just because he's hearing it in different languages, and maybe the other languages have been helping him, like you said, to be able to develop other parts of his brain or other ways with executive functioning and all those sort of things that are allowing him to keep up better than he would have if he only spoke one language.
That's
now,
right.
As far as parents go, and we're thinking about babies here, do you recommend that parents expose their children to other languages as babies if they don't otherwise speak them, like the little flashcards or calling things multiple names just around the house? Is that beneficial, or is it better if it's just by happenstance that you speak multiple languages at your home? Maybe that's not clear.
Yeah, I think short of going back in a time machine and only dating people who spoke a different language than me, there was not a whole lot I could do. Neither my husband nor I are fluent in any other language other than English. And so, I kind of panicked a little bit about this. Sometimes I wonder if this happens to you too, Phil, but I had this, what they call the curse of knowledge, where sometimes enough that it's dangerous. So I knew that at 6 months of age, the neural connections in my kids' brain that are inborn and set up to hear all kinds of different languages and sounds and those kinds of things, that the languages they weren't being exposed to, that those neural connections were going to start to prune. And so I kind of panicked, and I was like, we have to buy that, like, there was like this cube thing that spoke multiple languages.
Yeah.
And it was probably way too loud. We talked about sound in our other
yeah, we did.
But I was like, he had no interest in it. So I had to buy, it was expensive. Like, I was like, we have to do this. And he wouldn't play with it. And so like one day in my ridiculousness, I was like, great, now he's never going to be able to speak Mandarin without an accent. And my husband was like, I'm sure he'll be fine. Like, he'll probably grow up to be okay.
Right.
Like, I just get a little dramatic. But yeah, so if you have someone who speaks fluently, who's in your home a lot, do it. By all means, if you can do it, do it. The research shows no downside and really lots of benefits. But if you don't have someone who speaks fluently, or it's just too much, it's too hard, it just doesn't work, don't feel like you have to go out and get your baby like language classes or the flashcards or whatever.
Please.
In fact, we'll talk about babies learning from screens and flashcards when we talk about screens in just a minute. But really, babies learn best from multiple 3D, like in-person, interactive, face-to-face kinds of things. And so they will have plenty of time to learn language later. In fact, the brain is still very plastic for language through adolescence.
Right.
Typically when kids often get exposed as middle school, high school to another language. And then later in life, this is a really interesting research that if you want to learn another language as an adult, the best way to do that is to fall in love with someone or get a crush on someone who speaks another language, because all of the love hormones and the dopamine and all that make your brain more plastic to learn that person's language. So that's a good hack.
Maybe we can send our kids as they enter adolescence or those years where they fall in love on trips where they can then fall in love with somebody, and then our grandkids will be the ones that are bilingual and they'll do better. I love that idea. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And last question that I have that came to mind is, does it make a difference what the two languages are? I think most of our listeners are probably English speaking, but then, does another, I guess what I'm trying to ask poorly is if it's two romantic languages, Spanish and French, Spanish and Italian, something like that, does that make a bigger difference than like a romantic language and a guttural language or something along those lines?
Interesting. I don't remember seeing anything like that in the literature. I don't know that that's been tested or parsed out. But, what I read was really about the exposure to more than one.
Right.
And just all the cognitive benefits. But yeah, I would think, I have a sister-in-law who speaks 6 languages. She grew up in many different countries. And she has such facility that if we go somewhere and she doesn't speak that language, she can kind of pick it up really fast. And I think it can make our brains more plastic for learning other languages, because you learn some of those roots, you learn some of the nuances of language, particularly for the romantic languages.
So I think the bottom line that we've come away with is, if you have the opportunity to have your child be exposed to multiple languages, take it.
Yep.
Do not feel guilty if you don't have multiple languages to share with your child as a baby, and expose them when you're able, or recognize that they will grow up and go to school and have those opportunities then, so you don't have to go out and hire a tutor for your 6-month-old,
right.
Nor buy flashcards or invest in expensive things. But if the opportunity presents itself, by all means, take it. And maybe it's a good opportunity for you as a parent to learn another language or brush up on your high school French or Spanish or whatnot. I know we have this app that my kids have been loving called Duolingo, and it's free. And it is a really neat, easy way to learn another language. And they have like dozens and dozens of languages. But I, as a parent, have done it from time to time, just when I've been bored and playing with their phones or something with them. And it's kind of a fun app to learn language, and like it sticks with you. So maybe it's an opportunity for you as a parent to just take up another language and then share that with your baby as you go about your day, and they'll hear those words and they'll have tiny little incremental executive knowledge bursts because of that. And that will be to everyone's benefit.
Yeah, why not? And I think that's the thing is don't go out and buy expensive programs and flashcards because you feel like you should to give your child the edge. But if it's fun and engaging, and it's something you enjoy doing with your baby, and it's play based and delight filled, by all means, that's great. That's great for all of us.